So friends, every day do something that won't compute. Love the world. Work for nothing. Take all that you have and be poor. Love someone who does not deserve it. Ask the questions that have no answers. Say that your main crop is the forest that you did not plant, that you will not live to harvest. Laugh. Laughter is immeasurable. Be joyful though you have considered all the facts. Practice resurrection.
You're here at a spiritual community, and you might be wondering, what are you about? What are you for? What do you stand for? What are your values? And again, as it's been said already many times today, our values here at Aldea Spiritual Community really center around this one phrase, love, period. And for us, what that means is a couple things. First, it means that you are welcomed here, period, full stop. There is no comma, there is no asterisk, there is no you are loved if you believe X, Y, and Z, or if your life circumstances reflect this or that. No, you are loved and you belong simply for who you are. But the other thing that love, period, means to us is that love is how we navigate the myriad of spiritual traditions and faith traditions that are available to us in this world. See, here in this community, we're not so concerned about your beliefs or your doctrine. What we do is together we explore what it means to live full and meaningful lives of depth, of meaning, of hope. And we really have been asking this question throughout this past month in our most recent series. We've been asking this question, what does it mean and what does it look like when we are thriving in life? And I'm curious, what does that mean for you? What does it look like when you can look at your life and say, this is a season and this is a moment when I thrive, when I've been thriving? See, and as a community, what we've done throughout, our time together is we've answered that question as a community, what that means for us. And one of the ways that we've answered that question is by realizing that we thrive as a community, not when we all look the same or have the same beliefs or have the same life circumstances, but we actually thrive in our diversity. It's kind of like, it makes me think of a puzzle. How many of us are puzzle people out there? Okay. How many of you are like me where you want to be a puzzle person, but then you actually start to do a puzzle and you're like, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy? Here's the thing about the pieces of a puzzle. For a puzzle piece to truly fit in, for a puzzle piece to truly contribute to the larger whole, the bigger picture, it actually needs to be the most unique version of itself that it can be. It's not about copying another piece. It's about being its unique version and variation. And I think the same is true of you and I, friends, that we are much like that. That to truly belong means to be your most authentic, unique self and to be unashamed about that. But in that, here in this community, how that manifests is that there are people from a myriad of faith traditions here. Maybe you're someone where you grew up in Christianity and you draw upon the wisdom and the teaching of Jesus, or maybe you're someone who draws upon the wisdom and the teaching of the Buddha or some other different spiritual tradition. What we have found is that these teachers are pointing to a way of being in the world in the here and now. Not so much about how we might thrive in another place, in another time after we die, but how we might thrive in this moment here together. And so that is the lens through which we're going to look at Easter today. But before we do, I want to share a little bit of a story from my own life when I was in elementary school, which, as Jean mentioned, was probably not that long ago. And this is a story of my pet lizard, okay? And specifically my pet bearded dragon. Does anyone here have a bearded dragon or know what a bearded dragon is? Cool. Okay, so again, I'm a young boy, so I named my bearded dragon Flame because he's a dragon. And one day, I'm away at school, and Flame is only a few months old, but Flame dies. And I know it's Easter, but I'm sorry to say this isn't a resurrection story, okay? So I'm away at school. My parents decide, okay, what are we going to do? You know what we're going to do? We're going to go to the pet store, and we're going to get another lizard that looks exactly like Flame, and we're going to bring it back, and we're going to replace Flame without Jake knowing, okay? And I thought about this plan. You know, this week I was looking back into my history and thinking, this is an interesting plan. And it made me think, you know, you can't really pull this off with every kind of pet. Okay, there's only certain levels of pet that you can pull this kind of trickery off, right? Maybe a goldfish or a hamster, maybe a bearded dragon, but that's about it. But the second thing it made me think of is, you remember like your favorite show when you were growing up, and then they would just like recast an actor and they would act like nothing happened? That favorite show of yours where all of a sudden the mom was just a different person, but they pretended like it was nothing? I realized my parents were trying to recast my lizard without me knowing. So, I get home from school, and I take a good, long, hard look at my lizard, and I just immediately start crying because I just sensed that something was off. And so my parents told me what happened, and so instead of moving forward, pretending that this new lizard was Flame, I renamed my new dragon to Puff because, you know, Puff the Magic Dragon, which at that time in my life, that, you know, all it was a nice song, right? So... But I look back and I realized what my parents were doing was they were taking this moment where we had gone through a loss, we had gone through a change, and they were trying to move forward as normal, even though there was something new happening. And I realized, I look at our lives, I look at the fact that we face loss, we face unexpected change, and there are times where we just want to move forward as though everything is normal. We look at our world today, which is seeming like it's just an escalating sense of unprecedented change and transition. And it can be easy and tempting to want to move forward as though everything is just as the way it was. And yet, friends, I believe that resurrection and practicing resurrection is not about ignoring the pain or gliding over the loss, pretending that that transition or that change didn't happen. But it's actually about leaning into it, trusting that there is something on the other side. See, for me, when I look at the Easter story and I think about its meaning, for me, it's something that has evolved and changed throughout my life. You know, there was an old rabbi who once said that when you look at the ancient scriptures and the ancient stories, it's almost as if it's a prism. And as you turn the prism, the light refracts in different ways. You see the story and it reflects back onto you new ways as you change. How many of us reread our favorite book from time to time or rewatch our favorite movie from time to time? And though it has stayed the same, you have changed. And so you experience entirely new things each time. As we return to the Easter story this Sunday, what I hope that we can do together is not get hung up on having the right theology or the right doctrine, but instead we find a story really about what it means to be human, what it means to navigate through change. That to practice resurrection is something that we can actually bring into our lives in the here and now in hopes of experiencing a fuller life. Now, was anyone here present at the events of this Easter story? Like, was anyone here there at the Easter story? No? Can you? Okay, I can't see. Okay. Just checking. Maybe in that case, we can hold loosely some of the elements of this story. We can hold loosely getting hung up on, like I said, theology, doctrine, factuality. Instead, what we might do is be curious today about how this story has affected people for 2,000 years and how it affected the people who first heard this story 2,000 years ago. See, there was a group of people in the first century living under incredible military, subjugation and oppression from the Roman Empire. And this group of people, who we might call the early church or the early Christians, they begin to talk about love in a new way. They begin to think about life differently, and they begin to experience a thriving in community that hadn't really been seen in this way in the world before. In 125 AD, Roman Emperor Hadrian asked a philosopher named Aristides, who are these Christians? What is the early church? And this is what the philosopher said. They love one another. They never fail to help widows. They save orphans from those who would hurt them. If they have something, they give freely to the one who has nothing. If they see an immigrant, they take him into their homes and rejoice over him as brother. There's something about this story that affected their lives in that moment, in their version of the here and now. This story wasn't something that got them hung up on what would happen after they die. It brought them into the moment and focused them on how to live and love in the here and now. And central to that narrative was the theme of death and resurrection, a cycle that is universal and holds deep mythological significance. Now, sometimes, friends, we hear that word myth and we instantly get caught up thinking myth means untrue. And we get caught in this dichotomy between truth and untruth. But I love what the godfather of modern myth, Joseph Campbell, says. Mythology is not a lie. Mythology is poetry. It is metaphorical. It has been well said that mythology is the penultimate truth. Penultimate because the ultimate cannot be put into words. Maybe myth and the beautiful poetry and symbolism and images that we get from myth is as close as we can get to ultimate mystery. It's as close as we can get to God. It's as close as we can get to some of the fundamental, unspeakable mysteries of the universe before we drop language altogether. And so I cherish myth, and I cherish how it invites me to practice resurrection as something, not that I just read about somewhere, but something that I can allow to become part of my life and how I practice it in the here and now. And we see this in all life, right? Like, look out at nature. We see that death and resurrection is the engine of creation, right? That things die in order for other things to be nourished. A tree falls so that new life can be nourished by the nutrients that it left behind. Stars explode so that new stars can form, new planets can form. And as Kathleen said, it's no coincidence that Easter falls right around the equinox, this moment when the sunlight is equal to both hemispheres, a reawakening, a warming of life and of hope, a moment when new life begins to spring forth in ways that we can see. And that word Easter, it actually is drawn from a Norse goddess, Yoster, a goddess of fertility for humans, for crops. So it's this beautiful image of life and vitality in the world. And see, this past week, maybe some of us have walked around our gardens, as some people have already mentioned, or we walked around our beautiful Southwest desert, and what we've maybe seen is some desert blooms, right? And I love the imagery of flowers arising from cacti in the desert, right? That announcement of springtime. And some of you are thinking, like, it wasn't that, it was my allergies that told me that springtime was here. I'm sorry for all of you. But there's something so beautiful and so poetic about that image of something blossoming in a place that many people would consider inhospitable. In a place that many people would consider, something dry, something destitute, right? Richard Rohr, the Franciscan mystic and priest, said this: the resurrection is not a one-time miracle, but the revelation of how reality works, that nothing truly dies. Friends, we face loss. We face a change of plans. We face the ending of relationships, the ending of seasons. We face these little deaths. And yet, for many of us, we also face actual death. And it's in these moments where we question, is this the end of the world? Or at least, is this the end of my world as I know it? Friends, let the image of Jesus or the image of Yoster or the image of springtime itself be a reminder that life can blossom in the most inhospitable of places and that nothing truly dies. I want to, for a moment, just take a quick look at one of the characters in the Easter story that we don't talk about all that much, and I think we give an overly hard time to. I'm not talking about Judas, okay? Judas, I think we've adequately, been angry at, but but this is the character Doubting Thomas. See, as the story goes, Jesus is crucified, and then 3 days later, he begins to appear to the people that followed him. And it's during one of these, or the first of these appearances, that Thomas is not present. So when the disciples get back and they say, hey, Thomas, check out what we saw. And he's like, I do not believe you. And he got his nickname, which has lasted him for 2,000 years, right? And this is what he says. Thomas says this, until I see his hands, feel the wounds of the nails, and put my hand to his side, I won't believe what you're saying. 8 days later, they gathered again behind locked doors, and Jesus reappeared. This time, Thomas was with them, and Jesus says to them, may each one of you be at peace. He drew close specifically to Thomas, and he says, reach out and touch me. See the punctures in my hands. Reach out to your hand and put it to my side. Now, I really relate to Thomas here for a number of reasons. And the first of this is like, Thomas talked a really big talk, and then Jesus just calls his bluff. We've all been there, right? Also, I understand being a little skeptical. Like if this happened today, I would say, until I see Jesus posting on Instagram, I will not believe that he has resurrected. Lastly, I'm reading this story and I'm realizing Thomas's big issue is that he just wasn't there the first time. That's the worst thing that he did. He just happened not to be there. He was out walking his donkey, and then all of a sudden, 2,000 years later, we're still calling him Doubting Thomas. So I think we've been a little bit hard on him. But here's the reality. I heard a little bit of a groan. They're like, oh, that one was too far. We all, like Thomas, like the disciples, we all face loss. We all face change. We all face uncertainty. And yet sometimes, like Thomas, we want to guard ourselves against that pain, against that unknowing. And we guard ourselves with cynicism. We guard ourselves with skepticism. We guard ourselves with a lack of hope, saying, if I don't hope, then I won't be disappointed. When we are living in a mode of survival, we are preparing for the worst. And if we look at our world today, we see a lot of cynicism, right? We see a lot of skepticism. We see a lot of hopelessness. And again, there is validity to being concerned about so many things going on in the world today. But I think we have lost hope in what's possible in the future. See, when we are thriving, what we recognize is that even when our worst fears come to pass, there is still hope. There is still possibility. There is still resurrection on the other side. Friends, this is not a naive hope. This is not a blind optimism. This is a hope that is actually seeing the worst that life can deal to a person, and it realizes that there is always possibility on the other side. It's a hope that has gotten its hands dirty. It's a hope with some scars that is there not in spite of, but because of the difficulties of life. And we all can understand this collectively because 4 years ago, we were all thrust into a time of unprecedented change and uncertainty in the pandemic. And yet maybe, though for so many of us, this experience was one of heartbreak and loss and of fear and worry and anxiety, what it maybe has taken some of us 3-4 years to recognize is that there was also new life and new possibilities that came out of this time. That maybe for some of us, we realized that during the pandemic, we recognized things that meant more to us than we had realized before. We recognized that there are ways of being that weren't working for us in that old paradigm. We recognized systems in the world that aren't working. And we began to develop a vision for a life that we could lead. Maybe we're implementing that vision in the here and now. And I think for some of us, the pandemic has been a vision and an image of the resurrection that's possible in our lives. See, survival doubts if resurrection is possible. But when we are thriving, we practice it, we live it, it becomes part of who we are. And yet, friends, we can't live, we can't hope to thrive if all we're doing is guarding ourselves against the possible deaths that we might face. See, we fear that there will be an ending without a beginning. And so what do? We resist change. But change is the most reliable thing in the universe. Change is the only thing that is truly unchanging. And as the spiritual author and teacher Alan Watts says, the only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. Friends, obstacles are guaranteed. But our choice is to view those things as a problem or as a challenge, as something that we can work with, that we can dance with, that can grow us. When a river meets an obstruction, does it turn back? No. It finds a new path. It finds a new way through. And in the same way, what if we looked at those moments of disruption in our lives, not as an enemy of our path, but as part of our path? There's a South African lion tracker named Boyd Vardy, who has written about the parallels between lion tracking and this spiritual self-development journey that many of us go on. And he says this in a beautiful parallel between the two. He says, accept that losing the track is part of tracking. Go back to the last clear track. There's information there. Walk up ahead, checking any open terrain and bare ground. Open your focus. Any place that you don't find a track is not wasted, but part of refining where to look. Friends, in the simplest terms possible, what he's saying is, what if we could accept that losing our way was part of the way? See, we're all on unique journeys. We've all lost our way, and yet it's our choice to see that as a waste or an opportunity, that we might expand our vision to say that there is no misstep that we cannot bring into our path. There is no change that we experience that we couldn't learn to dance with. Just as there is no winter without a spring and no death without resurrection. But friends, it's not always going to look like we want it to look or like we expect it to. And this is why we need to expand our awareness. That if we want to thrive, if we want to live with hope and live with meaning, we need to be able to see in a new and more expansive way. Where at one point in life, all we saw was a fallen tree. Maybe now we're starting to see the new life and blossom that can come from the nutrients of the old. Maybe at one point in life where all we could see was the loss of a job or the loss of a relationship or a move away from home, maybe we begin to see the new possibility on the other side. And maybe when we look out at the world today, and we see systems and institutions failing us and falling apart, maybe instead of just losing hope, we can also begin to see new ways of being collectively that we might come to and evolve into that are on the other side. I shared this quote last week, but it's just so good, I want to share it again. It's Deepak Chopra who says, the symbolic language of the crucifixion is the death of the old paradigm. Resurrection is a leap into a whole new way of thinking. Friends, what is that old paradigm for you? That thing which it's time for you to leap beyond. Maybe it's a limiting self-belief. A belief that you're not worthy of love, you're not worthy of success, you're not deserving of happiness. Maybe this was a belief or an idea that was given to you by religion itself. Certainly our world has many old paradigms, right, that it needs to leap into. When we practice resurrection, what we are doing is we are stepping out and we are taking that leap out of the old into the new. But sometimes what that leap does is it leaves us somewhere in between the old and the new. That the old way is dying, is falling apart, and the new way of being has not yet fully been born. And so we find ourselves in a space that we might call a liminal space, an in-between space, a space that can be incredibly uncomfortable, and yet a space that is also rich, full of life, full of possibility. And so my hope for all of us, as we all experience those spaces in our lives, and we also experience it collectively as a world, I think it's what we're in right now. And my hope for all of us is, if nothing else, may we find peace during those moments. See, the disciples were in an incredible moment of liminality. They were in a moment where their old way was gone, and the new thing had not yet arisen. And when they experienced Jesus for the first time in this space, what does he say to them? Peace be with you. And we know, friends, that peace is not an external reality because we've all lived in the midst of storms where we had peace within, and we've all seen the opposite, right? Where things were relatively calm and we couldn't find peace. Peace is an internal reality, and it's a reality that exists here and now in the moment. That you may have had a difficult past and an uncertain future, and you still can have peace in the here and now. So for us to practice resurrection is all about how we show up in this moment, in the now, and the choice we make in the now to see things in terms of endings or in terms of new beginnings. See, friends, I'm not concerned with what it is that you believe. What I think is most important is how we act, how we show up, how we live and move in the world. The language of the universe is not beliefs, but actions. So may we practice, not just think about, read about, talk about, but practice resurrection together. In 1957, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered an Easter Sunday sermon called Questions That Easter Answers. And I want to just give us a few excerpts from that sermon. He says this: Easter provides answers to the deepest queries of the human spirit. Through the resurrection, we have fit testimony that this earthly life is not the end, that death is just something of a turn in the road, that life moves down a continual moving river, and that death is just a little turn in that river, that this earthly life is merely an embryonic prelude to a new awakening, that death is not a period which ends this great sentence of life, but a comma that punctuates it to much more loftier significance. That is what it says. That is the meaning of Easter. That is the question that Easter answers. People are always asking, what is the most durable power in the universe? And the fact is that Easter answers that question too. And do you know what that is? It's the power of love. Easter tells us that. Sometimes it looks like the other powers are much more durable. Then we come to see that isn't true. But the most durable, lasting power in this world is the power to love. Friends, on Easter Sunday, we remember the power of love. And as Dr. King says, the power to love being the most durable power in the universe. And that which is the most durable power in the universe belongs to us all. So may we remember that this year as we go forth and we practice resurrection. Thank you all for being here. Happy Easter.